Hello YouTube, welcome back to another alternate history video, and today I got the 1984 presidential election, which of course was held between the incumbent president Ronald Reagan and Democratic challenger Walter Mondale, the former vice president under Carter. Now of course 1984, like I say, you're coming off Reagan's first term, and Reagan was becoming very popular with Reaganomics and the recovering economy after the stagflation in the 70s under Carter and Ford. And like I said, it became very popular because of that. And the former vice president Mondale decided to go to challenge against him, but failed miserably. It was a landslide for Reagan. He about swept the map, and the only states that Mondale won was his home state of Minnesota, which actually was barely a win, and he won D.C. But in this alternate scenario here, you see I got Ted Kennedy, who was a longtime senator from Massachusetts, and the brother of President John F. Kennedy as a nominee. Now, Kennedy did actually run 4 years earlier in 1980. He tried to challenge an unpopular incumbent in Carter, but failed in the primary, but he was pretty competitive. But Carter was able to edge him out to secure his party's nomination for re-election. But like I said, Kennedy was the candidate then, and I believe he did not run in 84. However, in this alternate scenario, I got him as the nominee if he did decide to run. Now, like I said, Mondale, when he was the actual nominee, only won Minnesota and D.C. However, I could see Ted Kennedy actually doing a little better in this scenario. I think it would still be a Reagan blowout because of his popularity, but I could actually see Kennedy picking up some states that Mondale didn't win, being from the Northeast and being a moderate, like his brother, John F. Now, let's get into it. So, I believe Reagan would take these states over here on the West Coast pretty easily. Washington, Oregon, and his home state of California, as well as Alaska, and all these rural states like Nevada, the Mountain West, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, Utah, Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, very sparsely populated and more red leaning back then. I believe Reagan would have no problem winning those, as well as the Dakotas, South Dakota, North Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, and even Texas, as Reagan did have strength in the South. Although in '76 it was closer against Carter, who was a Southern Democrat from Georgia. However, Reagan definitely turned the South red in his runs, especially in '84 when the margins were bigger against Mondale, as he was from Minnesota. And I believe Reagan would hold the South in this case, since Ted Kennedy was more of a liberal from Massachusetts. I believe they would turned off him, and they love Reagan's policies, economic policies, and Second Amendment social conservatism. I believe they would stick with Reagan. That's why I think when these other states, deep South states like Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and even Florida, which wasn't even contested, I believe it was like a 30-point margin win for Reagan. So I believe it would be pretty big for him too against Ted, as well as South Carolina, Tennessee, Kentucky, and West Virginia, which typically had a Democratic streak. Back then, they go for Reagan in '84 after a win for Carter in '80, I believe. Reagan definitely up to his great appeal in this state. Like I said, definitely had a Democratic streak for years, but they definitely liked Reagan's policies, economic policies, as most of the country did. And so I believe they would stick with Reagan in this case, because it was definitely popular. In '84, it was just hard to take them down, as well as Missouri and even Iowa and Ohio. The working class and rural folks really loved them, as I said. Pretty much all the country did, as I keep mentioning. So I would say it hard for Kennedy to try to make it competitive. And Minnesota here, which was Mondale's home state, like I said, did go for him. It was actually very narrow, but it did go for him despite that. However, with him not being on the ticket, I could actually see Reagan flipping this state. Now, I could see Kennedy still winning it barely because of like Minneapolis and the suburbs, but Reagan also did great in the suburbs too in '84 in a lot of these states, especially in the Northeast, like New York and stuff. He did great in the suburbs around New York City. So with Mondale being off the ticket, I could actually see Reagan flipping Minnesota in this rare case. And you might disagree, but it's not really out of the realm because it literally was like a razor thin margin, which I'll show here on Wikipedia. So yeah, you see there it was like 49.7 to 49.5, so that shows you that could easily flip with Mondale not being on the ticket. So that's why I'm deciding to give this state to Reagan with how popular he was, as well as Illinois had great support statewide in the suburbs and rural parts, as as Illinois tended to be more of a Republican stronghold back then. And I believe he would take Wisconsin and Michigan. Of course, they had a great appeal with unions and working class all over the state, rural people. Reagan Democrats, I believe, would hang on to those, as well as Indiana, very rural and evangelical. And I think he would win Pennsylvania. I could see Ted making it competitive, but I think it would still hang on to Reagan because of his popularity and Reaganomics. And I believe he would win my home state, Virginia, as it had a Republican streak for many years, as well as North Carolina. And New York here, I believe, would be more competitive with it being Ted Kennedy. Reagan did win it by, I believe, an 8-point margin over Mondale. And like I said, I could definitely see Ted make it more competitive, but Reagan actually did really great in the suburbs of New York, like around New York City. He definitely had a great appeal, and with his popularity, I could still see him hanging on to it, but I think it would definitely be a lot closer with Kennedy on the ticket. Now, I could actually see it flipping, and you might think, well, I definitely could see it happening, but I think my guts tell me that Reagan would actually hang on to it still with how popular he became. And I believe he would take these states of Vermont, New Hampshire, Rockefeller, Republican states as they were known back then, as well as all of Maine. However, I believe Ted Kennedy would take his home state, Massachusetts, so he gets on the board there with 13 electoral votes, just like his brother did. I believe he would win Rhode Island in this case because it was actually close. Reagan was able to edge out Mondale in the state, but Rhode Island typically had more of a Democratic streak back then, and it still does today. So I believe Kennedy could flip into his favor being from this region and not having the baggage like Mondale did from the Carter years. I believe Reagan, however, would take Connecticut as it wasn't really as contested. It was more of a Republican identity back then, as well as New Jersey. Reagan definitely had great support in the suburbs in these states, as well as Delaware. However, I believe Kennedy would take Maryland, as it was a close state too between Reagan and Mondale. And I think with Kennedy being the right fit for New England, being from Massachusetts, I believe it would go him. And as well as D.C., which should go for Mondale, and has gone for Democrats for many years. So there's my final math with Reagan still winning a blowout as I predicted, 504 to Kennedy's 30. And I actually just realized I forgot Hawaii, so let me get that done. Now, Hawaii has always been known as a Democratic stronghold for many years. It's only gone Republican literally a couple of times, at least 2 or 3. I know it went for Nixon in 72, and it actually did go for Reagan in this year of 1984 because of his popularity, but other than that, it's been really Democratic for a lot of years. I could see Kennedy possibly flipping it, but I believe the margin was pretty substantial. It looks like 55 to 43, so it was well over 10 points. And so in that case, I will give it to Reagan since he won it by a pretty substantial margin. So I correct myself now. This is my final map. Now that I got Hawaii in, with Reagan winning 508 to Ted Kennedy's 30. If you enjoyed this video, like, comment, subscribe. Hit the bell for notifications. Subscribe if you haven't. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.